Hello, Valley Schuss fans. Welcome to video number 8, where Murray and I continue our conversation about the history of the resort. In this episode, we focus on the snowmaking. The resort purchased the snowmaking equipment from SMI. You can see them decked out in their swag here tonight. I'll never forget, as a young boy, the first time being up at the resort and seeing the Snowstream 320 in action. I was just always amazed and fascinated with the art and science of snowmaking. Another thing that I'll never forget is Lloyd Edwards, Murray's father, had a SMI patch that he must have received when he was purchasing the equipment, and Lloyd gave me that patch, and I remember I had my mother sewed on one of my jackets that I wore proudly with my SMI badge. So, without further ado, enjoy video number 8.
It's actually all my fault, Harold. I have the only aura that computers don't like.
It's your magnetic personality.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take it as a compliment.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'm Harold Carefoot. I'm here with Murray Edwards. We're doing another episode of Valley Schuss from 1960. I should say Valley Schuss, Orangeville, Ontario, Canada, from 1960 to 1980. So on the screen with me tonight is Murray. Murray, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you, Harold.
All right, so we've made a lot of progress talking about the years through the 60s, and now we're kind of moving up into the 70s. And then, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart as far as the snowmaking. So do you recall what year the snowmaking started, or maybe before that, when the decision was made and when you started the installation of the, so in other words, there had to be a decision made about spending the money, and then obviously the installation of the snowmaking equipment. Then we talk about like the first season that you actually had the snowmaking. So do you remember what year roughly it was that you guys started installing the snowmaking equipment?
I really couldn't say exactly years. I'm not great with dates, and Dad, God bless him, he would know. But what I know is that there were lots of places using this compressed air and water type of snowmaking equipment through the 60s, more and more every year. And Dad probably read something somewhere about this no compressed air type snowmaking equipment, otherwise known as SMI. I don't know where he got that information. We used to get the Ski Resort Management magazine, for years and years, and it may have been from that. So he got in touch with somebody, ended up buying one of the very first, I guess the first model, I'm not sure, what was it, 15 horsepower, I think, quite different than the 320s that came later. And I think I drove down somewhere near New York City to pick that up in my pickup truck. And we had to figure out how to get some water for that at the top of the hill, which is where we really needed it. And that involved buying a used large beer tank, I think it was, from a brewery that they were, selling, having it trucked up on a flatbed truck and put in a little valley near the top of the hill where we thought maybe it would be, we could fill it up in the spring or when it rained. It did make snow some the first year. I don't think it made very much. We also had to get electricity down the road, the fifth line. We did not run it up the hill, it came down the hill. So I'm guessing it was the late 60s, between 65 and 70. I don't really know the year. I know that after a while we realized that, well, that wasn't going to do what we wanted it to do. And then at the point at which the ski resort, or whatever you call it, the business, kind of had to reinvent itself, and it became gradually a private club, or never was completely private, but I think that meant that the people who bought memberships had to pony up some more money, enough to buy the snowmaking system. I don't know what it cost, but it was a lot of money. And I think they bought the T-bar at the same time. That would be 1970, the new Skyway T-bar, which replaced the Pommelet. But again, maybe our inquiries will turn up some more accurate dates than I've got, but that's the best I can tell you.
Okay, because I remember when it comes to the snowmaking, it was the newer snow gun, the 320.
Yeah.
That you and I, actually, I'll go ahead and split our screen now so people can see what we're talking about. But we,
Yeah.
on a previous episode, we talked about this photograph here.
Harold, that snowmaking had to be put in at the time that the T-bar was purchased, because the T-bar lift line got re-bulldozed or reconfigured in order to put that T-bar in, and the pipe for the snowmaking went up that same route. So it would have been 1970 when both the snowmaking and the T-bar went in.
Okay, yeah, because this. So you're saying you had a snow gun from SMI that was different than this one that we're looking at on the screen, an earlier
Yeah, it
version?
predated that. I don't
Oh.
even know what it was carried on. It was a pretty rudimentary thing. It was not one of those wonderful tricycles.
Oh, wow. Do you think you have any pictures of those? I've never seen what you're talking about.
I don't think I could produce a picture of that animal. I'll bet you SMI could.
Yeah, I'll have to see if I can research that. So
Yeah,
that,
their history should turn up that. I mean, I think they were sold. Well, I really don't know. I just know we had one and realized, well, this is not going to be all that much good to us. The water supply was really unreliable. It was quite small.
now, are you referencing the river where?
No, the big beer container we buried in the ground up at the top of the hill.
Right.
It may still be there. I don't know.
Yeah, well, that brings up, that's an interesting question. Was there a like a rating, like how many like gallons per minute of water you would go through? So
I would not know that, Harold.
okay, but I mean, that tank that you had, was it? Do you remember like snowmaking and all of a sudden, hey, we're out of water?
No, I don't remember the details of that.
Okay.
I may not even have been there at the time. I do remember seeing that snow gun at the top of the hill. It was a pretty exciting event. And I remember vaguely seeing the tank in the ground buried. I did various things in other places at that time, so I wasn't always around. In any case, it was kind of a flop, really, the first go around, but it didn't involve compressed air. I guess that was an advantage.
Right.
But I think SMI, just decided that wasn't going to be what they wanted, so they redesigned it and came up with the 320, which was way, way, way more advanced, and the stainless steel carriage was marvelous, strong as heck. But I don't know the dates. SMI people may have a historical document that could help you with that.
Okay. So where I'm just curious. So where was that tank buried?
Well, I can help maybe pointing it out on a photo. You would remember where Mom and Dad's house was,
Yep.
At the corner of the property, straight down into a little valley. At the bottom of that valley, about 500 feet away from their house and almost 1,000 feet from the top of the hill, was where this tank was buried. And we made a pipeline from there to the top of the hill, dug it out with a backhoe and ran water to the top of the hill, and electricity in from the fifth line, where we had, at that point, we had that arranged. That was partly for the snowmaking, I guess mainly for the snowmaking.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, I might be able to tell you. Wait till I get my glasses on here. So
Okay.
yeah, if you go to the top left corner of your photo there, you can see that patch of, there's two different patches of planted pines.
Up here?
Yeah, that one. So and that's the other one. So go to the first one you had, and there's a little clearing right there where your cursor is. Right there, that's where the tank was, right there at the bottom of that little valley.
Oh, okay.
It was not a water course except for a few days in the spring.
So you literally had pipes going from this storage tank to the top
right
of the
to
hill?
the top of the hill. Yeah.
Okay.
I
Did
don't
you,
think it was a very big pipe, and I don't remember ever seeing it, except that we had to have it up to the top of the hill to make snow.
yeah, was that something, I was just wondering about freezing. Was that underground? Did you,
Well, yeah, things like that always had to be below ground.
okay,
Yeah, it would have been at least 3 feet down.
all right. Well, while we got this picture up here, well, I'm going to kind of jump ahead of myself here on my notes, but as far as the snowmaking system, so I'll kind of backtrack a little bit. So eventually you ended up getting water out of the river, and I don't know the name of the river there along
Well,
the
you
fifth
want to
line.
hear? It's the Nottawasaga River.
Okay. And then do you remember, did you basically just follow like the road coming into the parking lot? Is that how you kind of ran the pipe from the river?
Okay, I can tell you a lot about that because I was on board that whole process of building it because I had the timber jack, which moved the pipes around. So from the parking lot there out to the gate and straight down the west side of the fifth line under the Hockley Road, we had to drill under the road with some sort of a machine, right down to the river. From the parking lot to the river would have been 300 or 400 yards. It was quite a distance. And at the river, we had to dig a big hole and put a giant septic tank in the ground with an inlet below the level of the river water and a big, huge motor and pump in there. So it was a 6-inch diameter pipe up and across the parking lot. And then it went from there to 4 inches all the way up to the top of the hill. And I helped to install all of that. I modified the timber jack so I could carry the pipes up, up the hill and drop them into the ditch while other people connected them and buried them.
So you see where my cursor's at down here at the
Yeah,
bottom? So, I mean, did you basically just bring the pipe up like along
pretty much along there to where the left-hand cars are parked there.
Okay.
About there, yeah.
And then from there, you just basically ran it straight up.
Yeah, it was just reduced to 4 inches and went right up the T-bar line to the top.
Okay, and that was it as far as the availability of water from that river. You didn't have it branching off anywhere.
Well, yeah, it branched once it got started on the 4 inches. It was okay, your cursor, you can't see where the big T-bar is. You can see part of the T-bar lift line in the middle of your picture there.
Right.
The new big one. But you can't see where it goes to the chalet. It's hidden by that little hill.
Right. Okay.
So anyway, from the chalet up, there was a hydrant at the bottom of the T-bar, another one where the bridge ended up being,
Okay.
and straight up another one near the top of that first steep incline,
Right.
and another one about where your cursor is, and then there was a branch going to the right and one to the left.
Okay.
One would serve Murray's Run. It didn't quite get to Murray's Run, that particular one, but there was another branch farther up, going one to Murray's Run right about there.
Okay.
Never went to the other side of Murray's Run. That was on the east side of Murray's Run. So I think we had 2, maybe 3 branch lines. I think maybe only 2, and then straight up to the top where there was a hydrant.
So do you recall like how many hydrants you actually had at one time?
I might be able to figure that out. Close to a dozen altogether, but I'd have to get myself a map and mark them on it. Maybe when we walk over it, we can identify them. I have a pretty good idea, but I mean, it'll take me a while to figure that out.
Yeah, I think on a previous episode, you were telling me that you could only run maybe three guns at a time.
That depended on the air temperature and where the guns were.
Okay.
So if the temperature was mildish, let's say, we could run more guns because the colder it is, the more water you have to put through the gun to get it to work properly. So there were times, and we wouldn't even start to make snow until the temperature was down to 10 degrees Fahrenheit.
Oh, wow. So really cold.
And we could only run it until it got down to 10 below Fahrenheit. So we had a window of temperatures that were critical. the obvious thing is that warmer temperatures, you don't make much snow and you're at risk of making really wet snow.
Hmm.
I mean, it's a very technical business, but
Yeah.
I could talk forever about that because I, more or less ran the system, with help from others, but quite a bit.
Yeah, I know from some reading that I did, at least with the technology today, it's all about temperature and relative humidity.
Yeah.
Um, so,
And wind as well was a big factor for us because at the top of the hill, wind would, play havoc with it.
right. All right, let me see here about some other questions I had. So that,
We never did have snowmaking where that third T-bar went. We could never make snow way over there, and I don't remember how that worked out.
okay, yeah, we looked at that on a previous episode up around
Yeah.
here. Yeah.
You could not make it way over there.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a long way to pump water, so.
Well, I think it would have involved a massive investment in a whole other snowmaking system, and that apparently was not in the cards at that time.
Right, okay. So do you remember when they decided to install the snowmaking, how long that process took?
Wow.
So I'm assuming that probably a season ended and then it's like, hey, we're gonna install snowmaking. So I'm assuming you did it in the
well, in one summer, yeah.
Okay.
But again, at that summer, Dad was selling T-bars for the Timberland Ellicott, and they were selling well. So same year, we put in a T-bar 3,000 feet long and, big motor, etc. And we also got a job, Dad and I got a job designing and selling and installing a T-bar and a snowmaking system up at Barry's Bay, Ontario. So I was there through the whole thing. I got to lay out the ski hill and install the lift and not so much the snowmaking, but I was there all summer. So I wasn't at Valley Schuss. I got to come home on weekends and see all the work that had been done. Having said that, I did run the timberjack and help to get the pipes to the ditch. So I was around some, but not all the time.
So do you know who would have been doing the majority of the work as far as installing the snowmaking?
There was a local fellow named Rennick who probably dug the ditch, but there were lots of people with backhoes in the neighborhood.
Was that the biggest part of the work, getting the backhoes just to trench the pipeline or whatever?
Well, I guess you could say that. I mean, the pipes were they were not welded together. They had what's called Victaulic couplings on either end. There was a groove cut with a machine of some sort in the end of each pipe, about an inch from the end, and there was this really neat chunky coupling that you had to bolt in place. So it allowed a little bit of a change of direction, like maybe 1 or 2 degrees you could kink the pipe at that corner. But basically you had to make a straight ditch, and it had to be 4 feet at least below the surface. So there were some places where the pipe probably had to be bent a bit. I don't remember that, but it pretty much had to be straight pipes. It was quite complicated to get it in. I do remember, I modified the timberjack so we could carry pipes either crossways on the front or lengthways on the side of the timberjack. It was kind of fun. I enjoyed doing that sort of thing.
Right. Do you remember, I know on a previous episode, you were telling me how you kind of recycled some steel in that one T-bar that was would you tell me it was gas pipeline or something pipes?
Well, the one we built ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were, trying to save money, I guess, but the T-bar we built ourselves was.
So for the pipe for the snowmaking, that was just stuff you went out and purchased locally.
Oh yeah, that had to be new, and it was black pipe and yeah, good stuff. Okay. And we even had to put in I'm trying to remember the name of this stuff, but it was a thing that prevented the pipe or helped to prevent the pipe from rusting over the years. And it was like an anode in the ground, some sort of electrical thing that somehow protected the pipes. I'll think of the name for it sometime, but I don't have it at the tip of my tongue. Yeah. This was difficult. Snowmaking systems were prone to rusting pipes because you'd have a wet spot or clay soil or something or other, and the pipes would rust after 5 years. You got a hole in the pipe.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I could definitely see that where that would be a challenge.
Well, we did at one point, we had a really serious problem, just up the T-bar at the second hydrant. There was a huge leak one winter, maybe, I don't know, it might even have been the first winter, Harold, but they had to bring a backhoe in, dig this hole in the water. You know, they had to repair the pipe or whatever it was. I can't remember. I didn't get into that hole myself, but I did see the big digger there digging the hole in the middle of the winter.
Yeah. Now, was that from freezing or was that just?
I don't know. I don't think
Okay.
it burst because of freezing, but I don't know the answer.
All right. All right. So can you see, I got the 320
Yeah.
back up here on the screen.
Yeah.
So can you kind of walk me through? I see the electric, I'm assuming this is the power. So wherever you were
Yeah.
moving the
We
gun
kind of
to.
hung the extension on the handle. The extension is hanging on this handle, which if you took the extension off and put it on the ground, that handle, if you lifted it up, the blade would go down. You know, the whole thing rocked.
Okay.
So that had to be where it should be. The cord, of course, would be somewhere else, but that was the thing that held and you could hold it at 2 or 3 different angles, maybe 4, straight up or down, down, down. And that had a kind of a mechanism where you could lock it.
Right.
Those things beside the blade, I don't know why they weren't on there, but initially there were these protectors to protect the workers from flying ice, which periodically would fly off the blades.
It's interesting. I was just getting ready to ask you because I remember those big, well, they weren't huge panels, but like you said,
yeah. Well, they're about 1 foot wide and 3 feet long. And I guess they were there, I think, primarily for liability reasons.
Gotcha.
Because if some stupid snowmaker, forgive the term, but if he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, he could get virtually killed by flying ice off that blade.
Right. Do you remember how fast that blade turned? Like how many RPMs?
Oh, most motors run at 1,750 RPM. I suspect that's how fast that blade turned.
Okay. So what about
I don't know. The motors may have been wound differently. I'm not sure of that particular stat. SMI would know.
Well, like you were saying, if there's any ice built up on it, it was turning fast enough that if it broke loose.
Well, yeah, and I mean that again was a thing that the operator had to be very aware of. You can hear and see sometimes ice building up on the blade. You have to either flush it out with a whole bunch more water. I remember at times maybe not the first winter, but we used to have a big tiger torch and a bottle of propane to sometimes hold it at the back of the blade while the thing was running to heat the blade to get the ice to throw off.
Well, that was something I was going to ask you. So was there no, so obviously you had electric to run the electric motor. Was there no heat up here at all, the way that the gun was designed?
No, there was no heat. Right there where your cursor is, that's where the nozzle was. It was a donut shaped nozzle right behind the fan, like almost touching the fan. Yeah. A bunch of little holes in the front of it and a pipe leading to it, which went down to the water hose at the back end of the unit. I think you can see the hose hanging out one side there.
Okay. I know exactly what you're talking about. I find that fascinating that they didn't have any heat up there. Wow.
Not at that time. Yeah. No.
I imagine
later models, I don't even know for sure about that. I know later models were radically different designs.
I would imagine if it was really cold out, you couldn't have. So when you turned the gun, or I guess turned the water off, I'm assuming you had a way to drain the water.
Oh yeah, we had to drain it really, really quickly.
Yeah.
And I mean, it froze up often. You know, we were always running down the hill with frozen hoses and thawing them in the chalet. That was a pretty regular event.
Okay.
I mean, we got better at it, but it was a very technically demanding situation.
Yeah. What did this box back here do?
That's the electrical box. That's the electrical comes in there, and there's a switch there, an on-off switch, right about where your cursor is.
Okay. Now, was that simply just to turn the fan on?
Yeah.
Okay. How about the water? Was there a switch somewhere to turn when you had the water hooked up?
Well, yeah, there's a valve just on the far side of the machine. You can see that curved thing, that thing. That's a short length of hose that was attached to the snow gun. like it stayed there permanently.
Okay,
The long hoses coming from the hydrants would hook up to the end of that right there. There's a valve on that. So
gotcha.
you'd hook the hoses up, everything, is dry, presumably, hook them up, start the water. I think you started the fan first and then you turned the water on. Yes, that's how it worked. So it was, it's a long time since I did this, Harold, but it was quite tricky to do it right,
Well,
especially when it was really cold.
yeah, I'm just thinking if it was super cold out, so let's just say the hydrant was over here. Just as an example, you'd have the hose running over here, so on top of this cold ground, all exposed to the cold, hooked up right here, and there's no heat. I'm assuming.
You gotta move fast.
So I'm assuming the only thing that kept it from freezing was just the friction of the flow of the water. So like you said,
Yeah.
you got to hook it up and get going.
The water was above freezing, so the heat of the water kept it from freezing up. But if you left it for 20 minutes full of water, you'd find the thing solid.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, I could see there wouldn't be any time for fooling around. You'd have to
No.
have your game plan.
It was quite demanding.
Yeah, no, I could certainly see that.
And when we had 3 or 4 of them going, boy, we were really hopping.
Yeah, yeah, I could see that would be a lot to manage. Was it, as far as the angle, right? So this one's pointing.
That's as high as you could get it, straight up almost.
So what dictated on what angle you'd place the gun?
To a large extent, it was wind. But
how about say there was no wind? How would you typically?
Well, if there was no wind at all, you could stick that up that way, and there's always some movement of air. It provided some of that. I mean, it was a fan after all, so it had, it blew everything straight out. But you wanted to spread it around mostly, but you also sometimes wanted it in one very specific small spot. So you could tilt it down, and you had to move the carriage, the tricycle around a lot. I remember being alone at times, moving that thing in a bit of a zigzag pattern. It was really hard work. I mean, I ruined my back doing it at one point, but you always had to be going downhill unless you moved it with the track machine. I mean, we did not always use it behind the machine. We could move it by hand. Having 2 people on it was, the usual thing. And sometimes you do that when the darn thing was running, which was really hairy, but we did it because you had to spread the snow around. And, you could not rely on just the air moving past the fan or ambient wind. It was very, very, it really kept us hopping, and we made lots of mistakes.
Well, that was another question I had. So was there any, I'm assuming from SMI, was there any type of training or anybody with any kind of techniques, or was like, here it is? And
not that I know of,
okay.
But I don't remember anybody from SMI ever being there. I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, I could see how, like you were saying, there'd be a big learning curve of trying to figure out what's the.
Well, yeah, it was mostly trial and error. I mean, there was good machinery for sure, and you had to learn with experience.
Mm-hmm.
At that same time, I used to get to other ski resorts occasionally, and most of them had air water systems, which were radically different and way noisier, but they were different. And I learned something from those guys before we had these. And then, once we had these, I was, steep learning curve, but I did learn.
Right. Yeah, I could
you can see on the 2 axles, the front axles, there's a bit of it's a brake. There was a lever that you could use to brake the 2 front wheels.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a little drum brake. And the black line going up the legs, that is the cord, which I think was prone to freezing now and then because the brakes didn't always work.
I was gonna say, I was just wondering if you did get the brakes to work, if they'd freeze and then you couldn't.
Well, yeah, they could. And there's a handle way back near the electrical box there that would activate 2 brakes. The one on the steering wheel did not have a brake.
Okay. So for the majority of the time, you would use like some type of equipment to like position them, and then once you got them in position, then you would just manually kind of move them around as needed?
Yeah, we could always move them downhill, but it varied according to the terrain. I remember one particular spot on Murray's Run with a gun, starting at one point and moving it during one night, 3 or 4 or 5 times, just a few yards downhill each time. But you had to turn the darn thing in a complete circle and fishtail it around. I don't know what the right word is, but it's very, very difficult to do.
Well, yeah, I can imagine on a sloping or a steep terrain that it was probably a handful to hold on to if you're trying to go
Kidding, it
downhill.
was, and you were almost run over by it at times. Well, they had the steering mechanism you can't see in that picture, but the handle that you held had a there you can see it on the left. There's the horizontal part. It was like a rectangular loop, but that part there it's a brake. You jam the handle into the ground and jump on it to keep it from running away.
Gotcha.
It was really crazy. No kidding. I'd love to see films of people doing it. In the background there is the thiokol. That's how we got it up and down the hill.
Okay.
Behind that, you couldn't pull the thing uphill by hand.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine it was probably fairly heavy. So, so who were the snow makers? So obviously you
Murray and Murray. How's about that?
So were you primarily the guy that ran
yes,
the
I was most of the time. Now there were times when we even made snow in shifts, like day and night, which was not all that common, but we did do it. So I'd be 12 hours all night and somebody else did it during the day. There were several other people who worked for us. I don't know how much Marvin Bookman did, but he probably did make a lot of snow. And I know names of a few other people who did make snow. It was hard to find somebody who would work those odd hours and was smart enough to do it. It was not simple.
Right.
It took a lot of attention. You had to really pay attention.
Yeah,
now having said that, I can remember standing or sitting or whatever, walking around beside that thing hour after hour after hour, just listening and looking. And this is in the middle of the night often.
Yeah.
So we always had flashlights, or usually did, but there were times when it was, really kind of crazy.
Did the thiokol have heat in it?
Well, if it was running, you could jump in and warm your feet up. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, like when you were out there all night, were you out in the elements, or would you go hop in a thiokol and keep warm and get out and check it? And
well, yes and no, we did some of each, but you couldn't.
Okay.
I mean, often there was at least 2 people. You had to have 2 people in order to run the thing effectively.
Okay.
One person might be running all the way down to the where the water started at the river to check on the pump or something or other. And there were times when it was really cold, when the ice, little flakes of ice would form on the surface of the river, and they'd get sucked down through the water into the intake pipe, and they'd freeze the damn thing up, so the water would stop flowing, and you had to drain the whole damn system.
Oh, wow.
And we had to keep going pretty regularly. We would drive the thiokol down to the parking lot, jump in somebody's car or truck, drive it down to the pump house. One guy would be down at the pump house doing whatever. I mean, when it shut down, you really had to get the water out of the system. I mean, the big pipe was 4 feet below, so it didn't freeze, but all the hydrants had to be purged. But I mean, we always had, whenever you turned the system off, when you turned it on, you had to have at least one gun going, because if you were pumping against a dead head, it was really hard on the equipment.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So you had to have water going somewhere. And when you were done, you had to open the very top valve and let it all drain by gravity right down to the river.
Okay. Yeah, I could see that was pretty labor intensive. And like you said, something they definitely had to know what they were.
Yeah. And it took a while to learn, because, I mean, I was there always through that several years period. Not always, but most of the time. I mean, I was the main guy who was the snowmaking guy.
So when you started the snowmaking process, what like the first year, when you got everything installed, like subsequent years, were you adding on things, or was it pretty much when you started, you had everything you had and that was it? You just kind of went with what you had?
I don't think we ever added a pipeline, although it could have happened once and would have been a, a short pipeline off the main one, but I don't think we did that.
Okay, so the first, I mean, basically, when you installed the system, it was pretty much what you had, and that's what you remember.
Pretty much, yeah.
How about as far as the snow guns? Did you start off with a couple and then add on some as the years went by?
I don't know that either, but I suspect we started with a couple and ended up with 4, but I couldn't answer that for sure.
Okay. Well, I guess the big question is how effective was it? So did it make a big difference? So,
Well, sure, it made a big difference for sure. I have, almost no knowledge of what it cost to operate it or to install it, but it did make a very big difference. Now, even that, in that climate, which was not great for ski resorts, we were hopping all the time. I mean, we would make snow while we could, and there was a time limit during which, I mean, not just temperature sensitive, but the hydro costs at certain months of the year. Like, I think we could only make snow during 2 or 3 months of the winter, but again, that's something that hydro knew about, and I didn't know much, but I know we had to stop at some point. But it was very, very, like, it's a warm place, and the temperature sensitivity of this stuff was pretty extreme. You could only, as I say, you could only make it at certain temperatures, and if it was too warm or too cold, you just had to not do it.
So as far as the power, was it something was that a limitation that the power company put on
yeah,
commercial users?
At that time, Ontario Hydro, I mean, they've always been the supplier of electricity. We had enough of it, but this is especially true of the ski lifts, but to some extent, I guess, the snowmaking as well. So if you can imagine, you turn your ski lift on and there's a real surge of power, like it wants a whole lot of power right now.
Right.
Because you got a ski lift with a 75 horsepower motor and a bunch of skiers on it, it just sucks electricity. So the hydro people early on in the first few years, they would charge you by the peak load, it was called.
Okay.
So the most you consumed in that particular month is how you paid. The ski resorts were always screaming about that, lobbying hydro and trying to get them to change it. And I think eventually they did change it. Because imagine like 3 chairlifts running and all starting at the same time. You just paid through the nose for that electricity.
Yeah.
The snowmaking, I mean, it did consume a good deal of electricity. Those are 20 horsepower, 3-phase motors. So all 4 of those running, that's 80 horsepower. No, they never started all at once. So the peak load was not so much of an issue as with a ski lift.
Gotcha. All right. So where do you think, as far as, so you said it definitely made a difference. Where would you say it had the biggest impact, on the resort as far as the snowmaking, where it was?
Well, it was at the top of the hill mostly.
Okay.
Where we had always had problem with wind blowing snow off. I mean, we were also planting trees even before these things came on board, but we always had trouble keeping enough snow at the top. In high wear places like the lift line, and where was the high wear places? There were spots on Murray's Run that would be wet if it was a warm winter. The water would come through the snow and you'd have this patch of ice, which if it stayed warm, and sometimes there was almost no frost in the ground. Like if the snow came early before the ground was frozen, it could easily thaw, especially if there was a moist spot on the trail, and you'd end up with this hunk of ice in the middle of the trail. So you had to make snow on top of that if you could. And even then it would thaw the snow that you made. So groundwater was a huge problem in certain spots, but the high wear places, the middle of the trail, like the edges of the trail, people, when they stopped, they kind of pushed snow to the side of the trail. So anyway, it was very specific to certain spots. And, I was familiar with the place like the back of my hand, so I pretty well knew where we had to make snow. And sometimes it was like on Murray's Run where the deck was, we had to run 2 lengths of hose from the nearest hydrant. I think we may eventually have put a hydrant down near the deck. When we walk through it, we'll probably notice that. But I do remember there was a lot of pulling hoses, especially if we let the darn things freeze, to get them out of the woods and down into the chalet and on the floor, wait for 3 or 4 hours till they melted. Anyway, it was very complicated, very complicated. And I'm sure it made a huge difference to the business, but the business is problematic no matter how you cut it all along.
Yeah. Were the hoses just like the typical, like a fire hose or whatever?
Yeah, they were good quality fire hoses, about 2 inches diameter. I have one of the ball valves, the ball out of the valve. I moved one today, just a chunk of brass that I've kept around. They were fire hoses, and I don't know we ever burst any. They were strong enough, but if you let them freeze, you were at risk of cracking the hose.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened. Oh, there we go. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we lost our picture there, but I got
Yeah.
it back. So the other question that I was curious about when it comes to the snowmaking. So, and then we're going to move on to the grooming. But so you got the snow gun here set up, and you're making snow. Are you constantly trying to move it so you're not building a big pile or a whale, or was it you would build a big pile, then you'd come in and you'd push it and groom it?
We never did that whale business except by accident. Our slope growing machine was not really a great machine to do that pushing. I've heard since that some ski areas would make it like a mountain of snow at the top of the hill and push it downhill all winter long. We did not do that. So if we wanted to make just the right thickness, a layer of snow, 3 or 4 inches if possible, preferably not very wet, but it was often very hard to tell just what the moisture content of that snow was. Again, it was a real art. So we were regularly moving, and again, it was temperature and demand sensitive. Like if you needed a whole lot of snow in one spot, you just had to redirect the gun. Like it would rotate on the tricycle. That whole thing would rotate through about 180 degrees. So you could spread it in different directions. And then when you figured you had to move it, you had to move it.
So when you say you can rotate it, so like I got my cursor here, you're talking about you would just take this and just rotate the tricycle.
Not the whole tricycle, the gun itself, right there. Go down to the bottom of the gun, right there.
Here?
There's
How about look at this picture over here?
An axle.
So right down here somewhere, you could just like you were saying.
It rotates around that.
Okay.
Probably not 180 degrees, but less than that. So you could run over top of either of those front wheels with your gun pointing either direction. So, and that's why the wheels are so far apart, so you wouldn't tip the darn thing over.
Okay. So could you tilt or point it almost 90 degrees left and right?
Almost.
Okay. Oh, I could see how that would make a big difference. So
oh yeah.
So you guys really had to pay attention and kind of keep just moving it and keep spreading it, trying to keep like an equal thickness so you didn't have a big pile somewhere.
So it was brutal work.
Yeah, I can see where it definitely take a lot of attention.
Yeah.
So.
And you could hear a lot. I mean, you could walk from one gun to the other and keep an ear to one you just left. Sometimes you got 3 of them that you're minding. I suppose even at times we had 4 of them going, but I didn't keep notes. But you really had to keep hopping, and you always had to be aware of the sounds and the feel of the wind. And you often had to walk underneath the gun and put your sleeve of your coat up in the air and let some snow fall on your arm. And you could tell by touching it, and oddly enough, by putting it in your mouth. Putting it in your mouth, you could tell immediately how much moisture there was in the snow. So I used to joke about, how they say don't eat yellow snow. Well, we ate yellow snow regularly because if it was wet, it was yellow.
So I'm curious, when you said the sound, what would the sound tell you?
Well, if there's just a fan with no water on it, you got this whirring sound. It was fairly noisy. Not as noisy as air systems, but it was noisy. And you turn the water on, that's another additional noise, like so it's even noisier. And depending on the amount of water you're putting through it, the noise would change. So you could hear, and the wind, you could hear from a distance, 100 yards away, you could tell the wind shifted because it sounded different.
Okay.
Very, very technical.
Yeah, so I'm assuming with the sound, and so you could almost tell just by the sound if you had the right amount of water.
Well, yeah, you could. And I mean, you couldn't tell exactly how much was going through, but you got used to knowing, well, I mean, you knew how much was going through it because you'd set it up that way. And if it happened to be getting colder or the wind suddenly stopped and you got ice buildup up on it, you could hear that almost right away. You could hear this different sound, and you got down there really fast because it would build up in a few seconds sometimes. And these chunks of ice would be flying off against those aluminum guards or just into the air. And it was like big chunks of ice sometimes. So you had to steer clear of those.
Yeah, I said something earlier, and I'm not sure if I totally understand. Could you actually control the flow or the amount of water, or once you had the hose hook?
Yes, you had to be able to control it. That was
What did you do?
the valve on that short hose there. That's it right there. No, at the bottom. There's a
Down
valve at
here?
the bottom. That's it right there.
Okay, so you could adjust that
Oh,
to
yeah.
control the amount of water.
Yeah, that was critical.
Okay, okay, all right, that makes sense. So and that's what you're saying would determine a different type of sound depending on how much water you had going through hitting the fan.
Well, and how much ice you had there too.
Yeah.
You could definitely hear the ice.
Okay. Yeah, I could see.
Yeah,
that.
I mean, one of the reasons I kind of enjoyed it. I did enjoy it, not being frozen cold, but I like technical puzzles, and this was a really complicated technical puzzle.
No, I could see that. Did you guys have any instruments? When I say instrument, so
I think we had these big tiger torches, so we could, if you got a little bit of ice, you could put this great big flame in the back of the fan, and in a few seconds you'd hear whiz, 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 all these little chunks of ice flying off. It was hilarious.
Yeah. What I was referring to is, did you so you're going to go out on a particular evening. I'm assuming you had a thermometer so you can monitor what the outdoor temperature was.
Well, that was in the chalet. We didn't worry much about that on the hill. We could feel what temperature it was.
How about the humidity?
We didn't have to pay too much attention to that because we had no control over it.
Okay.
We would phone the weather people periodically west of Orangeville and Fergus. I remember calling them often in the middle of the night and asking them what the temperature, whether it was going to get cold enough or whether it was going to change or wind or whatever. But we were pretty much on our own with that. Obviously, if it was a humid, I would say warm, because the warmer it is, the more humid it can be. When it's really cold, it's not going to be humid.
Right.
Cold air won't hold water very well.
Right.
So that was the ideal. The colder it was, the better snow you could make, and the more snow.
Yes.
So it was very temperature sensitive.
Yeah, cold and dry, I think is.
Yeah, down there around zero was great. 0 Fahrenheit.
Right. Okay.
But again, if you could make snow down at -8 or 9, you made a whole lot more snow, noticeable more snow.
Yeah. So here's the other thing that I was curious about. So on previous episodes, we talked about our fathers being the owners, and then you had somebody that Hans that managed the resort, and we were talking about it was only open basically on the weekends, and then for the Christmas holiday.
Yeah, sometimes one day during the week we would try that, but it wasn't very productive.
So when you got the snowmaking system, was it the same thing? Was it you basically shut everything down and then you came back on Friday or Saturday and said, hey, we got good temperatures, or would you take advantage during the week when you had ideal cold temperatures and make snow during the week?
Oh no, we would make snow whenever we could.
Okay.
Even though the place might not have been running for 2 or 3 days before and after we made the snow.
Okay. But see, that's the thing I find curious. So you were saying Hans, the manager, he had a full-time job in Toronto.
I think he did all that time.
But I'm assuming he wasn't coming out there during the week. It was people
I don't think Hans was not a technical hands-on guy that I recall at all. I don't think I ever saw him driving the slope grooming machine, although he might have. I certainly don't remember him making snow. So we had Gordon Lennox, was the father of Ross Lennox, and Gordon was there a lot. Again, he he had only one eye, and I don't remember Gordon making snow, to be honest. So it was guys like me and other guys that we would hire who made the snow.
I'm just thinking of the challenges if, because essentially I'm assuming they were kind of like part-time employees. It's not like they could come in Monday through Friday and work full-time.
No.
So
There were very brief periods when we ran it 24 hours a day. I bet we didn't run it 24 hours more than 5 or 6 times maybe in the whole history of the place.
yeah,
5 or 6 days.
So you were the primary guy where if you had ideal weather during the week.
Well, I could do almost the whole thing alone. I could get the guns all up in the place, hook the hoses up, and even run 1 or 2 all by myself.
Yeah.
But I'd have to start the pump at the river. You had to go down to the river to start the pump. It was kept me hopping, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
And I didn't often run it all alone.
Did it make any difference for you as an operator doing it in the day when you could see better as opposed to doing it at nighttime?
Oh, it was much better in the day if you could do it. If it was cold enough, we much prefer doing it during the day.
But I mean, why do you say that? What helped you during the day versus the nighttime? Just from actually seeing the pattern of the snow coming off the gun, or the type?
Well, I mean, you can see. You don't see it at night. If you're 100 feet away, you can't see it.
Right.
There were no lights on these things. And you could see it if you drove the thiokol up and parked it in such a way that you could shine the lights on it. But otherwise, you're in the dark. Forgive the pun.
Yeah, but I'm assuming that made a huge difference during the day when you could actually see like the plume of snow that was coming off the gun.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Yeah.
And we really tried as much as we could to do it during the day, but no kidding, the climate is not a great climate for that kind of stuff.
Right. Because I mean, you know this. I mean, today, I mean, all the ski resorts, they all have lights. So
well, and their guns are way up in the air as well.
Yeah.
These are only a certain distance from the ground.
Yeah, they're all
the higher you get, the better snow you can make, and farther you can spread it.
Yeah. Well, that was the nice thing we saw in a previous episode that you guys did have that one gun there at the top of the hill that was mounted on that pole.
Yeah, that was our only one.
But you could definitely tell a difference back then from that gun being mounted up on that pole and higher up in the air, that it made a significant difference as opposed to the ones that were on the tricycles here.
Well, the drawback of that, I mean, yes, is the answer to the question. It was if you could spread the snow around farther, which meant you had to move it less often. Again, it's wind dependent, but the others were much more mobile. You can move them all over the place. Boom, it stays put.
Yeah. No, I just was curious about the elevation, like you were saying, of the gun itself. If that had a really significant, difference in the quality, of how much snow you could make.
If we'd had a bunch of little helicopters, it would have helped.
Yeah.
Drones.
Yeah, because like I was saying, all this ski resorts today that I watched during the wintertime, I mean, they're all pole mounted. They have lights, so it's basically 24/7 and they can make snow, but most of the time it's at night when it's shut down because they don't like the skiers going through.
Nobody likes skiing through man-made snow. I don't think we rarely would have it running on a trail when there were skiers using the trail.
Yeah.
Although we did occasionally, and they hated it.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
Their glasses would get fogged up, and it was just mayhem.
Yeah.